Joining us today for this Best Bike Split webinar. My name is Dave Schell, and I am the Education Manager here at Training Peaks. With me, I have Ryan Cooper, the Chief Scientist and co-creator of Best Bike Split, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a pretty amazing piece of technology that allows you to take your power data, course info, and race day conditions to predict your best bike split ever. With that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Ryan Cooper.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. As Dave said, my name is Ryan Cooper, one of the co-creators along with Rich Harple of Best Bike Split. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we were acquired by Training Peaks in December of 2014, so just a few months ago. And I'm going to go, we're super excited to be part of the larger organization, and I'm excited to show you what we have. Talk a little bit at the end about where we're going to take some of the technology that we're developing. So just to kind of kick things off, we focus in three kind of main areas with Best Bike Split. So if you can see on our tagline, it's kind of predict, train, and race. And so I'll get into those as we go through the presentation. And as Dave mentioned, feel free to type your questions in as we're going through, and then when we get to the end, I'll start to go over those questions along with the demo that we'll show as well. So just kind of some basics of the agenda. We'll go over the basic software. We'll talk a little bit about the application itself. We'll go into some case studies, and then we'll discuss what we have on the horizon kind of over the next couple of months, along with what we have over the next few quarters and what we're going to do with Training Peaks, and then open it up for questions. So to go over some of the basics, Dave mentioned a little bit earlier, but what we've created is a math and physics optimization engine, and what it does is it takes your athletes, or if you are, so this is kind of tailored towards coaches, but this presentation, but it'll take your athletes or your power data, specific information about the course, and then race day conditions to both predict your race performance and create a power plan for you to follow on race day, or for your athletes to follow on race day. And when we say best bike split ever, it doesn't necessarily mean the fastest bike split. On time trials it would, but on a triathlon it may mean that it's the best bike split you can do to set up a good run time. So we'll get into a little more of that as we go through the talk. So we like to kind of think about the future of race planning. And so in the past, you would go out and you would race a course, and you would pretty much go as hard as you could. You would then take a look at the results and say, okay, well, I didn't do very well that time. Now how can I do better next time? And then you'd try and train and then go and race. But you didn't really have any way to gauge, other than your results, how the race progressed. So today you still do the race, but now you have these great tools, power meters, to start to gather a lot of data and a lot of information about how the race is going or how your training is going. You can then take that data, analyze the results just like you did before, and then try and implement new strategies the next time. And that's kind of the area that we put ourselves. So we take the training and your race results and your data that you're gathering off your power meter and try and help you plan future races based on that. So our solutions kind of fall into three buckets. So first is the prediction bucket, kind of a predict and plan bucket. So using knowledge about your power data, knowledge about the courses that you're going to race, we can go in and accurately predict your time for future races. And that's pretty interesting, but planning the race to make sure that you hit a time and you hit a power number that will give you the best overall race is sometimes of more importance. So, but making sure that you have accurate results is kind of our first area that we really try to focus on. Second, we try and help athletes by helping train specifically for the courses. So when you run a Best Bike Split plan and create a plan for a specific course on a specific day, we provide files that you can then load into things like Trainer Road, load into your Garmin head unit for training purposes so that you can feel what the power is going to feel like on the day of the race. So you can kind of pre-plan and pre-train sections of the course before you actually get out to the location on race day. And then finally, we want to help execution during the race. So currently we do this through two methods. So we have, as you can see on the right there, a cheat sheet, which basically gives scenarios that you would see during the race. So you can kind of read through the list there, but it's flat rolling headwind with a certain power target for that, minor hills, so 1 to 2% grade with a target, medium hills, etc. And what that basically does is it boils down what the strategy or the optimal pacing strategy is for any course, and then allows you, while you're on the race course, to say, okay, I know that this is a flatter section and I'm experiencing a pretty good headwind, so these are the type of power targets I should be hitting. Or if I'm starting to go up a small hill, here's my new power target to hit. We also have what we call a Garmin Power Course, which leverages the course's functionality on the Garmin Edge devices. And so when you load a course onto your Garmin Edge device and run it, it'll start picking up the latitude and longitude points along the course and giving you power notification instructions. So as you can see on the little screen, you'll get a little a beep, and it'll say 217 watts. So now you know your average power target for this section is 217 watts. There's still a few issues with the Garmin Power Courses in terms of trying to keep the target on screen, and so we're working through some of those to try and make it a better experience. So I boiled down the solution breakdown, but just to kind of go over it again, on the prediction side, there's 3 different types of models that we have. So you can predict the power needed to hit a goal time on a specific course in specific conditions. So let's say you're shooting for that 5-hour bike split at Ironman Florida. Well, now you can put in 5 hours and see, based on your bike setup, your weight, the wind conditions on the course, you can see what kind of power numbers you'd need to hit that bike split. You can also predict finish times for a goal normalized power target. So if you had a power target in mind where you know you're going to try and hit 85% of your FTP, you can plug that in and then see what type of times that you could expect to finish in. And then finally, something that's very powerful for triathletes is predict both the power needed and the time expected for a specific training stress score. So if you know that you run really well off the bike at a certain training stress score, TSS, then you can plug that goal TSS into the model and get out a power plan and an estimated time finish for that split. Also train specifically for course and specific conditions, either indoor using something like Trainer Road or Peripedal, or take that outside, load it as a workout into your Garmin Edge or even a Jewel device, and go run and basically ride to those specific segment splits or course power splits outdoors. And then finally, as I mentioned, on race day, actually execute based on a Garmin Edge device or on the cheat sheet. We find that most of the pros that use our software tend to prefer the cheat sheet, so they kind of tape it to their top tube, or in some cases we even had a pro write it in magic marker on their forearms because they couldn't see their top tube since they were so far over the front of their bike. So let's get into a little bit of how the system works. We take very detailed kind of picture of the course, so both elevation data as well as direction data for wind purposes. We also take information about the athlete's power. We take local weather data, so we use a service called forecast.io to pull local weather data, which includes heat, humidity, wind direction, wind speed. And so we pull that data and apply that to the model as it's running. So the weather service we use actually allows us to look historically up to about 40 years in most places in the past, and then actually does a estimated forecast for the future up to 10 years in the future. So obviously, the closer you get to the race, the better the forecast gets. But it's a pretty interesting service that it can start to pull that really local weather data based on future forecasts. And then we take very detailed information about the rider. So not just the rider, but also the bike setup itself. So in this case, you see the Trek rider on a speed concept with a disc wheel and a shallow front end wheel with an aero helmet. So we take all of that information as well as the rider weight, the bike weight, and then now we've just added a new feature to do position-based drag estimation as well. So we'll get into a little bit of that in later on in the talk. So all of that data gets kind of filtered into an optimization engine, and so this is what we created. And to give a little tiny bit of background information on how it got developed, I was sitting on my couch in 2013 in July, and my wife had just had our first child, and so I had taken a week and a half off of work, and I was sitting on the couch and I was getting ready for the tour, and I was thinking it'd be really cool to be able to do a math model that would predict the time trial finishes at the tour. And so I was sitting up late working on it every day, and then my wife was not very happy because, well, she was also sitting up late, the baby, and I finally finished an initial cut of the model at like 2 a.m. right before the first time trial. And so I added in data from all the riders I could find. So we had some Chris Froome data from 2011. We had some Contador data and some other things. So I started to kind of put all that together and came up with some predicted finishing times. And the next morning, about 7, my wife was up, and she's like, "What is wrong with you? What are you doing?" And then we started watching the race, and the time started coming in, and we were within 10 seconds on almost every rider. And so then my wife got more excited about it, and she said, "Well, what are we going to do with it?" I said, "Well, I don't know what we're going to do with it, but I'm sure we can think of something." And I talked to Rich, and we kind of built up the app around that idea. But we didn't want to make it just prediction. So the second kind of eureka moment was on Slow Twitch, we saw a picture of Tony Martin's race plan for that same time trial. And he had broken the 19-kilometer, I think it was 19-kilometer, it may have been 19-mile race into about 200 or 180 different segments where he was breaking it all down every 100 meters on exactly what he was going to do. It was all written on this big spreadsheet that he had printed out. And I said, that's what we need to do. We need to automate that and create a cool plan that people can follow on race day. And so now it takes kind of the thought process out of it. It takes the emotion out of it. You riding to this plan, you know you can hit it, and you know that this is going to give you the best possible time. So that is basically what became the optimization engine on the back end, and we've, since 2013, updated it quite a few times. I think we're on version about 93 of the model now. So it's something that we continuously try and update and perfect. But the outcome of that is kind of what you see here. So it's a little bit messy, but it's a power plan, and then it has an estimated speed overlaid on top of the elevation. So for this particular race, I believe this is Ironman Mont Tremblant from last year, this is the optimal pacing strategy for one of the riders there who happened to do fairly well. So we'll kind of go into that in a second. But and just to kind of point out some of the complexity behind this, a typical model would have about 300,000 independent variables that it's solving for every model run. So sometimes larger models take a little bit longer to run than the shorter ones, but it is a fairly complex model that it's trying to solve for. So one of the things I like to stress about modeling in general and modeling in best bike split is that the importance of accuracy. So good data in is going to equal an accurate model. So bad data in is usually bad data out. So a few tips that we like to provide to kind of help usher a good experience with the software is to make sure that you have correct rider and bike data. So correct threshold values, so make sure that your FTP is accurate, so that when you're riding and testing that your power meters are calibrated correctly. I know DC Rainmaker stresses that a lot, that calibration of your power meter to make sure that your numbers are consistent and accurate. Accurate height and weight data, equipment types for various race bikes or training bikes, and then one that's very hard, the biggest area of difficulty in modeling is realistic aerodynamic drag. And not everybody can go to the wind tunnel, and not everybody can go to the velodrome and test. So aerodynamic drag is a tough thing to try and nail down. So that's an area that we've started to really investigate to help our users get realistic aerodynamic drag numbers. In the software, I'll kind of show you, we have some drop-down menus that you can use to kind of get an initial starting point for drag. But we've just released a drag estimation based on your bike fit data, so body measurement and bike fit data. And we're doing some work with Retool to kind of define like those different measurements that we're going to take. Right now we take about 12 to 14 different measurements. So it can be a little time consuming, but it's something you can actually do yourself, and it does get the model much more accurate. Knowledge of the athlete's power duration curve, so knowing that what kind of percentage of FTP you're going to shoot for at different types of events, or what type of TSS values you would shoot for at different races. And as I said earlier, a well-calibrated power meter. Power meters are a little different across the spectrum, as hopefully some of you have come to realize anyway. So there's power taps that measure power at the wheel. There's Quark and SRMs that measure it at the crank. There's vector pedals and a few new pedal types that are measuring it at the pedals. And so you have different types of power meters, and for the most part, they're all within 2 to 3% of each other. But it's just something to make sure that you're aware of, that when you're using different power meters to kind of look into it and compare what you're seeing to what other people are seeing, just to kind of make sure that your power is calibrated correctly. And then, of course data. So the second biggest area of potential error is in elevation data. So what you'll find is that some GPS watches don't always give the best elevation data. So what we suggest is and opposed to pure GPS, which will have a lot of error in it. But when you're loading a course into Best Bike Split, we do have the option to use satellite elevation correction. So. And then another thing, if you're going to create a race that you've never done before, making sure that the course follows the roads. A lot of times if you have a GPS device and you look at the data and you kind of zoom into it, you'll see, whoa, I didn't remember going through that field. Well, that's because some of the GPS has a little bit of jumpiness to it. So if you're going to use a Garmin Power Course, you want to make sure that the course follows the road so that you're not getting off-course warnings. Let's see. So I'm going to kind of jump into the software for a second. So let's see if I can do this. So Dave talked earlier, so we're going to use him as a guinea pig just to kind of show some of the features. I have a coach's account, so if you had a coach's account when you first log on, this would kind of be your athlete dashboard that you would see. So you have the option to add a new athlete, which is somebody that you would control. The athlete would not have access to that account, and they would show up as non-members on the screen, or you can invite an athlete, which will invite your athlete to set up a free account, which you can then attach to your account. If I jump into Dave's profile, he's got a couple of races coming up. So he's got the Boulder 70.3, and I believe, are you doing St. George again? and he's doing St. George again. So one of the things I wanted to point out was the ability to do a lot of what-if scenarios. So we kind of have Dave's last year setup for the Boulder 70.3, where he hit around 2 hours and 24, 2 hours and 23 minutes. So this was kind of the model that we set up for him based on his old bike fit data. So this would be a race plan. So you'd see the course map, you'd see the power plan, and you can kind of drag along the power plan. If you have a coach's account, you'd also see an athlete link. So you could share basically this exact page with any of your athletes, which includes all the file downloads. So if you wanted to train indoors, you could use an erg file or an MRC percentage file or a specific Trainer Road file, which has a few things that are specific to Trainer Road, and we'll be enhancing this in the future with some more instructions kind of as you ride. You could also download a Garmin workout. Garmin workouts, when loaded manually, are limited to 50 steps. So in this case, if you had more than 50 segments, it would reduce it to 50 based on the closest power intervals. You can also download a Garmin activity, so you could load into something like WKO and compare with the actuals. And then, as I mentioned, the Garmin Power Course for race day execution. So all of these are described on our support page, so if you need any information about them, you can go to our support page. You can also go to our YouTube videos on how to import those. Those will be updated. A lot of those videos are about a year old almost, so we'll be updating those to kind of highlight the new look and feel of everything. So from this plan, we can see he had 2 hours and 24 minutes and 45 seconds. But if we wanted to do a quick what-if scenario on this, we could go to the duplicate plan and scroll down and say, hey, what if Dave weighed 10 extra pounds this year than he did when he was doing it last year? So we could come in and adjust the bike rider weight and say, okay, let's look at it and see if he was 10 pounds heavier, what kind of time could we expect on the same normalized power? So I mentioned earlier that we had 3 different model types. So we have the normalized power model, which has a goal power target of 85% of his FTP. So that would be the 221 watts there. You could also do a goal time model where we could say, okay, if I wanted to do a 220, what kind of power would I need? Or the training stress model, where if I go in and say, okay, for a 195 or a 180, let's look and see what kind of power and what kind of time we would expect from that. So let's run this. Change this. While this is running, this is a fairly longer course, so it takes a little bit longer than say a 40K. So now you see with that 10 extra pounds, his time has gone from a 224 to a 226. So it's actually not that big a difference, about a minute and a half difference with that 10 extra pounds. This course has a little bit of elevation gain, but for the most part, it's fairly flat. So you're not going to see a ton of change on this course. Whereas if you were doing something like Ironman Wisconsin or Lake Tahoe, then you'd start to see, or St. George, you'd start to see a much bigger difference between that time. So if I have a feature below where I can compare the 2 races, so if I want to compare the Boulder 70.3 to the Boulder 70.3 with 10 extra pounds, I can go in and see that for the same basic average and normalized power, I'm seeing a difference of about a minute and 20 seconds or so, where my watts per kg is dropped quite a bit with the 10 extra pounds that I have. So what this is saying is that weight for this particular course isn't going to be as important as potentially aerodynamic drag. So we took the retool numbers from Dave from his last retool fit and loaded that in, and so they've retools dropped him quite a bit in the front end, and then done some narrowed his torso angle. But what you can see is that by reducing his aerodynamic drag, he's looking at over 5 minutes of time difference from his last year's time on the same exact power. So on this particular course, drag makes a big difference compared to weight. And that holds true with most of the research that you probably or potentially have seen out there, where drag is the biggest force that most triathletes are going to face. So starting to reduce that has a much bigger impact than potentially losing that 5 pounds extra. On the run, that's a little bit different story. So kind of getting into that same topic, I'm going to jump into the bike. So this particular athlete, once you've loaded an athlete, so I've loaded Dave, I can see Dave's athlete profile or dashboard. I can go into his bikes. So here it's mostly the same bike, and we've been doing different types of configurations on each bike. So if I jump into his latest bike, I can kind of see some information about it. The weight of the bike, this is fully loaded with water bottles, etc. The types of wheels that he has. So in this particular setup, he's got some kind of 303 type of wheels on his bike, and he's running a clincher with butyl tires. So another area that he may be able to get some time gain on is by switching from butyl to latex tires, which will change his rolling resistance. So if I go and update this bike, you'll see there's quite a lot of information that we have to have about a bike, and that goes into that good data in equals a good model out. So right now for drag calculations, you'll see that we're using his bike fit measurements, but we could jump back into a basic riding style, and all it would do is use this drop-down menu. So racing position, does he race primarily on his tops, on his hoods, on his drops if he was on a road bike, or in his aero bars, kind of more of a recreational triathlete, not very flexible, kind of a high torso angle, a mid-pack triathlete, a more advanced triathlete, or for the super extreme, kind of more of a pro time trial, very narrow, very kind of compact position. So as you can see from this, if I was just to pick advanced triathlete with all of his other settings, he'd be sitting at a 0.265 CDA, so drag, basically drag coefficient in his frontal area. So, but by using his specific bike fit measurements and body geometry, you'll see that that number drops to 0.228. So he's actually much more aero using his bike fit measurements and his actual geometry than if he had just used our basic riding position. So to get better accuracy out of the models, we definitely suggest using, if you've done a retool fit or if you've done a bike fit, using your bike fit measurements along with some body measurements. So you'll see hip to shoulder, hip to head, these kind of measurements to fine-tune your drag calculation. And we do have on our support page some instructions of what the measurements should look like. So you'll kind of see it's a little hard to see on shoulder width, but that should be edge to edge of your shoulders when you're in your racing position. The rest of it most of the rest can be done from a standstill except for torso angle, which would be the angle from a flat line, pretty much perpendicular to your top tube, and then with the angle going through your shoulders kind of to the top of your head. So with that, I'm going to jump back into our presentation. So this is something we say to our coaches, but we want to help coaches be a hero to their athletes, or help athletes achieve the best that they possibly could. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily the fastest time, but it's the strategy that leads to the best overall result. And just a few ways that we've seen coaches use best bike split with their athletes, and some of these we hadn't thought of when we originally kind of developed the concept, but one coach was using it to set a target power to make sure that their athletes could meet their bike cutoff time. So usually you think of best bike split as the pointy end of the spear, kind of front of the pack triathletes and time trialists, but really there's other applications that if you think about it, you go, whoa, to have the best day, you have to make the bike cutoff. So, I mean, to be able to finish. And so finding what kind of power that you need, and maybe it's only 150 watts, but those kind of things are important to the people that are racing. Also help newer athletes understand and visualize correct pacing techniques. One of the things that I fall victim to, as I'm sure most, a lot of other people do as well, is when you see somebody come flying past you and you go, I'm gotta go. I've got to just hammer it and try and keep up. And then, but if you have a plan going in beforehand, you know that that's not what you should do. That you should be, okay, I'm going to stick to this plan. I'm a triathlete. I love lists, so I'm going to be checking off my list. And the race plan is just another list to start to check off and say, I know that for my best time and my best race, I'm not going to follow that. I'm going to keep to my plan. Target a known TSS goal where you know your athlete can run well off the bike. So Joe Friel, and I think in 2012, and it may have been before that, had published a really cool article on how to quote-unquote cheat using a power meter for Ironman events. And it basically had a TSS chart that said, if you're a good runner and you're finishing in these kind of times, here's the goal TSS that you should have. And that chart was amazing because with Best Bike Split, you can now use that chart and start to really target TSS goals and say, okay, here is where I know I can run well off the bike, or I'm a really strong runner, or I'm not a very good runner, so here's kind of the TSS scores that I should be trying to target, and then start to really do what-if scenarios around that. Set realistic time expectations. Used to have a coach that I would talk to, and some of his athletes would say, I've got to do a 5:30 bike split. And, well, okay, 5:30 bike split at Ironman Florida is a lot different than a 5:30 bike split at Ironman Wisconsin. So making sure that for the athlete's power data, the expectations are set so that they know that these are the things that are achievable, these are the things that may not be achievable, or maybe to achieve these, I need to target a specific race and not just do the race that's most convenient on my schedule, because Ironman Lake Tahoe may be convenient, but the bike course is not going to help me hit a 5:30 bike split. Also show the benefit of a proper bike fit. So we've been doing a lot of research in this area, and bike fits are great for comfort. They're great for helping you to achieve the best power position, but we want to help also show the benefit in terms of drag. So the eyeball test is great for kind of giving you a general idea that this is going to be more aero than this, but there's no easy way to quantify that right now. So we want to try and help quantify how much better one bike fit would be to another, or what one position would be to another. Something that we do a lot with Trek Factory Racing is help select bike and wheels for a specific race course. Not everybody has a ton of bikes and a ton of wheel choices, but for those that do, certain wheels and certain choices may make sense on one course versus another course. And then, of course, compare race times with current fitness to anticipated race day fitness. So this is where things like, if you're looking at Training Peaks and you have your athlete tracking all their power data, you can start to look and say, okay, here are the gains that we have now, here are the gains that we can expect. If you were to do this race now, here are the type of times you could expect, and if you were going to do this race in 3 months, here's kind of where we expect your fitness to be. And then also gives another justification for your athlete to purchase a power meter. So training with power is crucial. So I mean, it's funny when you talk to the coaches here in Boulder, a lot of coaches won't take athletes that don't have a power meter. It's not that way in a lot of other places. Obviously, power meters are expensive, but if it can help you meet your result at an Ironman, then suddenly, you're going to do, let's say you do a half Ironman and an Ironman, suddenly that investment starts to make a lot more sense. If you have a horrible day at Ironman, then you know that $800 that you spent on a power meter starts to look a lot better if you have a great day at Ironman. So I wanted to go over a couple of case studies for like real world uses that have happened. This is actually from an email we got after TJ won last year's North American Championship in Ironman at Ironman Mont Tremblant. we got an email on Wednesday after the race, and he said, "Oh, I just wanted to thank you for the software. I used it at my race. Everything worked out great. It was amazing." And then, of course, we looked up his account, and he was using the free version. So that was a kind of an eye-opener to us. So the free version you can get good results with, and you can help it plan out your strategy with the free version as well. So here's some comparison numbers just to kind of take a look. We actually had the course a bit long for Ironman Mont Tremblant. We had it at 179 kilometers. It was really 178.28 according to TJ's Garmin file. We had estimated the time pre-race, so he had estimated the time pre-race at 4 hours and 28 minutes. He actually did 4 hours and 26 minutes, so he came in a little bit faster than our time, but of course we had a bit longer on the course as well. Average speed was very close. Average power he hit almost spot on, and he actually had a lower variability index than what our model said as well. And so some cool things to point out about this is that he thought his major plan going into the race was to try and break the bike course record for that particular course, which I think was at 4 hours and 30 minutes or somewhere, 4 hours and 30 some odd minutes. And he was thinking he was going to have to hit 300 watts to break that record. And if he had gone out at that 300 watts, we showed him that on 280 watts, he would easily be able to go under the record. So had he gone out at 300 watts, the race may have been completely different. His training stress score would have shot up most likely. The second half of the bike may not have gone as smoothly. But by actually holding it back and knowing that he could still beat that time, he had a lower training stress score. He had one of his best runs off the bike. I think his best run since 2011 off the bike, actually, by targeting less watts and not kind of blowing himself up just to hit that bike record. One of the cool charts that I like to kind of point out is this is the power plan that he had for the race. And if I overlay his actual power numbers from the race, you can start to see how closely he matched with the plan. And so not everybody always follows the plan this closely, but but it worked out really well for him in this case. And there were a couple of places where he actually deviated from the plan. After the first climb, his power dropped. He basically coasted down the first hill, and that was due to his heart rate spiking. So he let his heart rate level out by basically soft pedaling down that first downhill section, and then to break Raylard, I believe, at the turnaround point, he spiked his power up above the plan for a couple of good efforts, basically to break Raylard on those sections. It's funny, in 2013, I was watching the Tour de France, developing the model. In 2014, we were at the Tour de France, helping Trek with the time trial. There was only one time trial. It was the second to last day. And we were helping Zubeldia with his pacing strategy for that. And so using basically optimal power pacing, and we developed a special cheat sheet for him. He was able to move from 10th to 8th in the overall placing, and kind of had one of his best time trials of his career. So for that one, we kind of did a multi-plan comparison, and from that, we didn't know exactly what type of watts he was going to be able to hit on the day. So we looked at 3 different strategies, 3 different watt strategies, and then kind of came up with a baseline watts that he felt comfortable with, and then on the different hill gradients, what type of watts he should bump up by. So he had a baseline watts, and on small hills, he would add 20 watts to that. On medium hills, add 45, and then on major kind of hills, he would add 80 to 90, and then on minor descents, he would subtract 30 off of that. So it was kind of just a way to say, we're not sure how great your legs are feeling, but in the first part of it, see how you're going, and then use this basic strategy along the rest of the course. A few things that we have that we've just kind of released in the last month or two. We focused a lot on trying to do coach-rider attachments. One of the major feedbacks we got back from our coaching interface was that there's a lot of data to fill in, and it would be nice if the athlete could fill that data in. So now we added the invite, so coach can invite a rider. The rider can fill out their basic data, attach it to the coach account. The coach has complete access to be able to premium access to that rider data. When the rider logs on, if they're just a free member, they only see the free member access. If that rider is also or athlete's also a premium member, then both the coach and the athlete have complete access to everything. Some things we're looking at in the near term: enhanced weather modeling. One of the areas that is on some courses can become an issue is the weather modeling. So instead of picking one weather point along the course, we're going to pick up many weather points to kind of give a complete weather profile forecasted over the length of time of the course. So for something like Ironman Arizona, where the wind tends to pick up over the course of the day, then that'll take into account, the model will take that into account, or someplace like Kona where certain sections are more sheltered, whereas other sections are wide open and athletes are kind of getting blasted by a headwind or a crosswind. All of those things will now be taken into account. New model types, we've actually finished the variability index model. If you're not familiar with variability index, it's basically the difference between average power and normalized power. So for most time trials and triathlons, the rule of thumb is to stay under 1.05 variability index, but certain athletes can handle a more surging nature of riding, and so they can actually handle a bigger variability index. You also see in hilly courses that the variability index tends to be a bit higher. So if we look at Dave's, I could bring it back up, but if we look at Dave's St. George 70.3 time, his variability index was somewhere around 1.07 just because there was a lot of up and down in that course, compared to Ironman Boulder where it would have been at 1.02. Training Peaks integration points. So we're looking at expanding all the different types of files that we can parse. Currently, if you want to create a course file or a course in Best Bike Split, you have to have a GPX file, which you can get from pre-writing the course or mapping the course out in some of the mapping software that's out there, Ride with GPS or some of the other Map My Ride. But we would like to be able to load .fit files and all of the type of files that you can load into Training Peaks and open that up so that we kind of expand what we're able to do. And then also pull athlete data eventually. So if you have a new FTP or something like that, be able to link your account and pull that kind of data back in. And then, as always, we're always open to user requests. So many of our features have come from coaches and athletes that use our software. So, and this has been true since the very beginning. So every time we do get a user request, we do put it on the board, and based on priority, either it gets moved up or moved down. So we do take those very seriously. Long-term, kind of in the next few quarters, what we're looking to do, actual ride analysis. So not doing what Training Peaks does today, but doing more ride to plan comparison. So where did things go right? Where did things go wrong? Also bringing in heat and humidity adjustments, so similar to the altitude adjustments. Oops. Sorry about that. Similar to the altitude adjustments, being able to adjust for heat and humidity. And then a really exciting thing to help with the drag estimation will be ride-based drag profiling, and then potentially live race analysis via Quark. We've tested that out on Ironman South Africa last weekend, and so it's something that we'll hopefully do more of in the future. So, all right. So I think that's it if we want to open it up to questions.
Well, yeah, we've got just a few questions here. The first one is, does the drop-down drag calculator make a distinction between UCI compliant and non-compliant bike geometry and rider fit requirements?
Okay, so no, it does not, but that is an area that is of interest. If you use the bike fit, actually let me go back to it. If you decide not to use the drop-down, then you can use your seat tube angle and to adjust for some of those geometry position UCI rules. On the drop downs on the bikes, they do not. So that's something we could look into. We try and only release things once we have enough data to support that it actually makes a large difference. What we would see, though, is on a UCI bike, especially in the body position, you would see this drop back down to 74, and then you'd probably see your torso angle start to tighten a little bit. So those are some areas that we haven't yet looked into, but it is something that we definitely can add to the list.
The next question is, would you suggest keeping one version as a sort of master copy or a baseline and then create duplicates as required as you start to make those tweaks and adjustments?
For sure, and that's exactly what we did with Dave's profile. So for Dave's profile on his bikes, we had his original kind of P2 old fit, and then we made duplicates and renamed the duplicates for his new fit, and then based on his specific retool numbers. So we did the same thing on the races as well. So where we had the Boulder 70.3, but then we duplicated that to make adjustments. So in fact, all of these except for the St. George test are Boulder 70.3 testing from last year and planning for this year.
So you've mentioned a couple of times that there's a free version and then also a paid version. So first question, is there a free version available for coaches? And follow up to that, as an athlete, what is the difference between a free version and a paid version?
Okay, so for coaches, the free version is the same for both coaches and athletes. So it gives you a single rider. In fact, I can probably load one up. So the free version gives you basically a single rider, and then it allows you to add a single bike. So if I go into my bikes, I can see that I have a single bike. I can make as many adjustments to this bike as I want, but I can't duplicate this bike. So it's a single kind of bike instance. You can load as many courses as you want, but then you also only have a single race as well. Now, once again, you can update this race as many times as you want. So this is Austin 70.3. I could change it to Oceanside 70.3 rerun. But then I'm also limited slightly on kind of what information is presented to me. So yaw angle distribution chart, for instance, is not displayed. Kind of a more advanced feature where to help with equipment selection potentially, and kind of let you see how much time you can expect in different angles. You also have a limited, I think, four downloads. So you could download 4 training files, or you could download 2 training files and 2 race files. So you're limited. It gives you enough to run models, to determine, to do some training and do some racing, kind of give you a really good idea of what Best Bikes is about. But it does hide some of the more advanced features.
And follow-up question to that, as a coach with a paid account, would you notice a difference between a free athlete and a paid athlete?
So I'm going to go back to my coach account, and no, the short answer is no, you wouldn't. The athlete would know the difference. But if I look at, say, a premium member, so I'll look at. I won't share anybody's data that I shouldn't share. Well, like Justin will be all right with it. So a free member, you have access to pretty much, or a premium member, you have access to everything. So complete visibility of everything that you can see. And if I go back and do a free member, which I have one here, you would also have complete access to everything. So for the coach's perspective, there's no difference. We do indicate on the dashboard which ones are free and which ones are premium, mostly so that you know if you're communicating with them that if they're a premium member, they'll also have access to everything. If they're a free member, they'll only see a limited amount of data.
Can you just briefly go over the yaw angle distribution and kind of describe what information you could gather?
Yeah. So let me look at a couple here. So on yaw angle distribution, one of the things that a lot of companies like to do in their marketing is kind of show how much drag they have, and they have this yaw angle chart, and they're showing that the drag is dropping significantly as the higher you get in yaw angles. And so one of the things that you can kind of start to look at for this is the faster you go, typically the lower your yaw angle is going to be. So the more time that you'll experience in the 0 to 5, 0 to -5 type of range. And what that can do is help you with equipment selection. It can also help you if you're going to buy new equipment. For instance, certain bikes now, it's really hard to get a bike or a set of wheels, well, mostly bike frames that are optimized across all the yaw angles. So something like a Trek Speed Concept or the Cervelo P5, those seem to be geared towards those low yaw angles, whereas something like a Shiv tends to do even a little bit better at the kind of medium or higher yaw angle. So one of the things you can look for is if you are planning on making some kind of bike purchase or equipment purchase and you have a major race, you can look at what the typical wind conditions are, kind of run a model on it and say, what kind of yaw angles am I going to experience? It also helps you kind of understand what type of crosswinds you would expect. In this case, for this particular race, the yaw angles are pretty narrow, mostly 0 to 5 and 5 to 10, so you'd experience a little bit of crosswind, but not too much. But if I was looking at something like, let's see if I have a Kona one. I don't know if this one will be good or not. Yeah, so if you look at something like Kona, suddenly you have these huge yaw angle spikes at the outside, so you know that you're going to be seeing a lot of crosswind. So it's just something to kind of get you prepared for the race so that you can kind of know going in what to expect.
Great. Got time for 2 more questions here. A lot of Ironmans are multi-laps, but if you are able to find a GPX file on the internet, it might only be 1 lap. Is there any way to tell best bike split to kind of repeat that lap for the calculation?
So it's funny, Rich and I just talked about that last week, and so we're starting to look at adding a couple of new features kind of on the course side. So one would be kind of a cropping feature to where if you had a GPX file and you had a warm up and a cool down and then to be able to crop that down. The next would be a looping feature to basically say how many loops is this. Currently, if you send it in a support ticket and send us the GPX file, we will loop it for you. You could there's some mapping software that you could do it as well, but the easiest thing is probably just to send it to us and have us loop it until we get those new features up and running.
And last question here is, how can you use that bike split for a 4-person team time trial?
So it's funny. It's funny you should ask that. So we actually, unfortunately, I can't show it, but we actually did do some work for a team time trial recently, and what we did is we wanted to see where on the course it made sense to for the stronger riders to pull. So one of the things you could do, let's see if I can go back to this time trial. Let's just go back to the Texas State time trial. So this may not be a great example, but one of the things you can do is look at the power profile, look at the pull phases that you think you're going to do power-wise. So when the person's up front, how much power do you think that person's going to pull, or how much can that person pull? Kind of average that out and say, okay, this is our total power target for the people that are pulling in the race. And then map it out and say, okay, we know that certain riders are stronger than other riders and can pull maybe a little bit, pull at that higher power level. Where on the course does it make sense, conditions-wise, for them to take potentially more pulls or to structure it to where their pulls happen to come at those sections? There's definitely some other areas that we've started to look into, optimal pull length, optimal pull power based on the rider's power duration curve, et cetera. We haven't done that on the actual site. That's all kind of been behind the scenes, mostly because we have to see if the market's there to be able to kind of release that and put the effort into it. What we have done, and we've done it for World Pro Tour teams, is kind of exactly what I said, looking at past data to see what the average pull power is across the pull phases, using that to determine where it makes sense to potentially have your stronger riders take more pulls, or position your timing wise to where the stronger riders happen to be pulling in those sections.